Real interesting, I think could be real instructive for things that might be coming up in the next few years. So managed forest land is privately owned land. Um, we used to call it forest cropland or tree farms. And so and there's several in Dunn County. The one I'm most familiar with is up by Wheeler. And so if you have land in a tree farm and you enroll it in the MFL program, you get a huge tax break on your property taxes and other things. And the rationale for it was that it takes a long time to grow a tree. It's not like you can plant corn in the spring and harvest it in the fall. You plant a tree now, and in 30 or 40 years, you're going to have a sellable product. So they said, we're going to lower your taxes way down to help it make it manageable financially. But we also would like to make this land available to the public, because the reason they're getting the tax break is that the state is then giving the township or the county government money to compensate them for the loss of taxes from the person's property taxes. So the county's still getting its money, but it's coming from the state and from our pockets rather than from the landowner. So they said, if you are in this program, we want you to open your land to the public for certain uses. Probably the most common one is hunting. You can also go in and do photography, berry picking, bird watching. The one I'm real familiar with up by Wheeler, they've actually cut trails through the woods so people can go up there and hike and do stuff. Or snowshoe, I like to go up there and snowshoe. So the land is managed by the landowner. They usually work with the county DNR forester to come up with a forestry plan. And so if you're into watching birds, great, you go up there. But then if some rare, junco type bird hangs out in these trees, and it's time to harvest those trees, down come the trees, and away goes the bird. So in terms of really long-term wildlife habitat management, it has severe limitations. And if you go back to that slide from the National Forest Service where you've got 52 different multiple uses, and they try to balance everybody's interests, whatever the landowner wants is what happens. Okay, so it's a public space where the public can go, but it's managed by a private entity. And so there's limitations on what will happen there and how it's managed. Okay, stewardship funds. So it was called the Nels Nelson Stewardship Funds. It was named after two of our really environmentally friendly governors. I think it's about 30 years old. And basically the state set up a pot of money to help facilitate the purchase of public lands and also to do habitat improvement projects. So here in Dunn County, there's been quite a few. The latest one is the Dobbs Landing project, which is out kind of towards Colfax on the Red Cedar River. And it used to be well, there's always been kind of traditionally a canoe landing there, but it was pretty sketchy to say the least. If you've ever used it, there's sort of a rough path to drop a canoe and no place to park a car. And there used to be a small gravel pit there and stuff. So the Dunn County Alliance, which is a group of outdoors clubs, got together and this place came up for sale. So they got together and they worked with the credit union and the landowner, and then they applied for stewardship funds. And it was a 50% match. So we had to raise half the money, and then the state gave us the other half the money to purchase this land, and then gave us more money to manage it. And they're doing prairie restoration and some others, putting in a parking lot and doing a bunch of things to turn this into a really nice wildlife area again. The problem with the stewardship fund is that with the budget-conscious people in Madison right now, they're saying there was too much debt with the stewardship fund. So we're going to talk about later, they told the state they had to sell off a whole bunch of land to help pay for the stewardship fund. The history, I've already kind of covered the history, and we'll just go into changes and things that are happening with public lands. But first, before I do, does anybody have any questions about anything I've said so far?
The Ice Age Trail, is that federal or state?
That's a state trail. Yeah, that's one of the, that would be, was it about 1,000 miles, but that was all state managed, state owned, or leased or whatever, but yeah, that's a state trail. Yeah.
Whose land are they selling to pay for the stewardship fund? I mean, what lands?
Mostly it was DNR wildlife areas. So like here in Dunn County, there was about a dozen parcels of land that got put up for sale. Like, if you go north on 25, if you know where the Lambs Creek Wildlife Area is, roughly, yeah, it's a little bit north of the road that goes to Jake. It's like the next road to the left, and it's back in there. And there's, I don't know, a couple hundred acres of DNR land there that's open for public use, hunting, whatever. And then on the other side of, so that's off to the west, and then on the other side there was like a 40-acre parcel of land that was in the Lambs Creek area, but it was completely landlocked. So like that was one of the parcels they put up for sale. Now we have another area up between Boyceville and Connorsville. And it's called the Chimney Rock fishing area because it runs along a creek. And the Boyceville Rod and Gun Club, or actually the Northwest Rod and Gun Club, which is up in Boyceville, and I'm a member. Our members back in the late 1950s raised the money to buy that land, and then we donated it to the DNR for public hunting and fishing. And that also got put on the block for being sold. And so I drafted a letter, and we called a bunch of people and raised a little noise about it, and that got taken off the list. But basically they put a whole bunch of, I think they were ordered to sell 10,000, or at least put up for sale 10,000 acres of public land, and sell them. Some of it got bought by counties or townships, and some of it got bought by private entities, and some of it's still for sale. So if you want to buy yourself a hunting area, you probably could.
Jim, do you know when they stopped funding the state parks?
Last budget session.
The last one?
Yeah, last biennium. So, yeah, they took out all funding for state parks in Wisconsin, and now state parks are supposed to survive on user fees only. So your park stickers, your camping fees, whatever you pay to the park when you get there.
Does that mean the fees will get raised so high that the common everyday family can't afford them anymore?
That's the direction it's heading, yes. That was one of the main concerns a lot of people had when they, if you go back to Teddy Roosevelt's whole thing about rich and poor alike in the democratic, process because of the woods, but yeah. So, well, I'll jump right down here to sponsorships. What I haven't. So they are, the National Park Service just came out with a policy where they're going to sell sponsorships. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work, but you may walk into Yosemite and you may see one of those famous waterfalls with a great big billboard right where everybody stands and looks. It says, "Eat at McDonald's on your way home." And there was also, this case has not been resolved, but they had turned, and many, actually this happened under Reagan, that they have turned over much of the concessions in national parks over to private corporations to operate. Like you go to Yosemite, or when we were at Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon, there was somebody operating like all of the campgrounds and hotels and stuff that are on site or other places. Well, this one, and I can't even remember where, I think it was Yosemite. I'm talking off the top of my head here. But when they lost their contract and somebody else came in, they claimed that they had copyrights to all of the names in the park because of their past contract. So in other words, like if it was in Wisconsin, Big Manitou Falls, well, you can't call that Big Manitou Falls anymore unless you pay us a copyright fee. So that's what they were claiming, and I know there was a big lawsuit that was coming out of that, and I don't know if that's ever been resolved. So, and now the state of Wisconsin is also looking at sponsorships for our state parks. And what exactly that means and how that's going to play out, we don't know. But they've said they're interested in it because obviously you cannot run a state park on user fees. I mean, that's just impossible. Now the guys running the state park said there's no way this is gonna work. And so, and it's a very short hike from saying 3M is gonna sponsor the Red Cedar Trail to 3M owning the Red Cedar Trail. A very, very short hike. So, and that's, and there are groups out there, if you just Google it, just go privatizing public parks. You will, just do a Google search. All you gotta do is just type that into Google, and you will get 2 or 3 organizations that are out there working to that. So one is outright sale of lands to corporations or other entities to manage it. With the change in administrations and the power structure in Washington, one of the very first things they did was to change accounting practices so that if public land is disposed of by the federal government, under current rules, that was a negative for the budget. Okay? So if you gave Yellowstone National Park to Walt Disney to operate for now on, whatever the value of that park would have come off the budget. In other words, it would have been like a 50 million or 100 million or whatever price you would put on it, whole in the budget. Now that is a wash. So you could give away Yellowstone National Park and it wouldn't look bad on your, because if you're from the Republican Party, you don't want bad budget deficits, those are bad. Right? So that's one of the steps they've taken to make it easier to sell public land. The lands, though, that they really want to get their hands on right now are more the BLM land and the Forest Service lands, because oil leasing and mining. There's been a huge controversy up in Boundary Waters because they want to build a sulfide copper mine right on the edge of the Boundary Waters and right on one of the rivers that flows into the Boundary Waters. And so they've been fighting this for years. The state of Minnesota's come out against it. The EPA's come out against it. And then the Forest Service signed the lease. So they don't know if that's going to go through or not. But they're still fighting over this copper mine. But if it makes it easier to, turn the land over. Then they were talking about a land swap, actually. Some land that's not very valuable for the copper mine. So the other thing is leasing of lands for mineral extraction. That happens quite often. Here in Wisconsin, of course, we have this huge iron ore mine up. That hasn't happened yet, but it was up in the Bad River, up in that area, flowing into the Lake Superior. Our legislature and governor passed and signed the law greatly liberalizing mining activities and changed some of the laws that now if you degrade, before you couldn't like ruin a wetland or whatever for a mining project, now you can as long as you promise to build another wetland someplace else. So that's changed. Also, as we were talking at lunch, there's a provision in the law that allows mineral, so if they hold mineral rights to Lake Minoman, and you realize underneath Lake Minoman there's a big gold pile, they want to mine it, they can actually drain the lake and divert the water around the lake and then extract all of the gold out of it, and then when they're done they just pull the plug and fill the lake back up. And that's to any dammed waters in the state, any what we call flowage. And that law, even though the mine is gone, the law is still on the books. So overharvesting of timber, that's probably more controversial out west where they still have a few virgin forests where they're coming in and doing clear cutting, and then you can kind of see. Oh, that's on the next slide. But when they talk clear cut, I mean it is nothing standing. There was a place up in the Nicolay where I used to grouse hunt when I lived over on that side of the state, and you had this one beautiful drive back to this wilderness area. And we went up one year, and the drive into the wilderness area was now a field. Because they had literally cut all the trees down. I don't know what they did with the slash. They must have chipped it or something, and then plowed it and planted it. I mean, it looked like a farm field, it had been woods. Another problem, this may sound strange, but hunting is not nearly as popular as it used to be. Most hunters look like me, gray hair and bad knees, and younger people aren't taking it up. And now, if you don't like hunting, that may sound like a great thing, but who's utilizing a lot of this public lands? It's hunters. And especially out west in that BLM land, if those guys are going out, and it's a huge industry. I mean, it generates billions of dollars of activity, economic activity. But if people aren't going out to hunt anymore, and this land isn't, generating some money for the local economy, what's going to happen to it? Who's going to advocate for that land? The hunters are right now, and in fact, I'll show you some articles here that they're getting ready to fight any transfers of public lands because that is the land they hunt on. I hunt on public lands. I don't have enough money to go out and buy my own hunting party or whatever. So I've hunted in the Nicolay, I've hunted in the Schwambigan, and right now I'm hunting in county forest land up by Birchwood. So it's, as there's getting to be fewer and fewer hunters, there's less people to speak up for the public land. And even other environmental laws like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, it was a coalition of hunters and other environmental groups that got that passed. And one of the real things that a wedge has been driven between those groups with the anti-hunting efforts, and it's really interesting because some of those are funded by people like McDonald's, which makes you scratch your head. Why would an animal, somebody that sells dead cows, fund animal rights activists? Well, if you got the hunters and the animal rights activists not talking to each other because of the anti-hunting issues and animal rights issues, then all of a sudden you've removed the political force that made some real major changes in laws and legislation that improve the environment. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Cutting of funding. So the national, like I talked before, the National Forest Service, they're spending out like half of their budget on fires right now. And if you go up north, like where I used to deer hunt up by Cable, there's a public campground called Twin Lakes. Beautiful place. It used to be open year round. Now they put a gate after Labor Day and close it off because they don't have the money to keep it open year round. And they closed some campgrounds permanently up there and some trails up there because their budget has been slashed so much that they couldn't afford to operate these anymore. So they're trying to work with local groups now to get money to actually keep federal property open to the public. We're seeing that in Wisconsin. You just saw, we just talked about the state park funding and other funding for other lands too. I used to work on the Red Cedar Trail for about a year and a half as kind of a little ground guy, and at the time we always had someone on the trail to make sure everybody had a bike pass because that money came back to us. Well, they don't do that anymore. So a lot of people are renting these trails for free, and the maintenance is going down because the money's cut even more because you don't even have someone to enforce the rules. It's kind of a vicious downward spiral. Wise use. That's a really interesting term. Now, if you go back to Gifford, he was like the first advocate of wise use. And he said, wise use means the use of public lands for the widest possible number of people. Okay? And so that term has been taken over by the oil extraction industry to mean we get to go on the land and use it because just letting it sit is bad. It kind of goes back to the whole, wilderness is bad, civilization is good. Plus you're going to make a lot of money at it. So wise use now, there's a whole wise use movement which means, well, we really can't have wilderness and stuff like that. We got to turn it into condos. And so back when the term first came up, you heard to use wise use. And some people still use it that way, like the Wildlife Federation, which I'm on the board of directors. We talk about wise use, meaning we're going to not do anything stupid and ruin the land, but then it gets confusing because then you also have the oil industry and other people saying, well, we need to wise use the land, which means we're going to just get rid of the resources. Unconstitutional wackadoodle claims. So, you remember the Bundys? Yes. They claimed that it was unconstitutional for the federal government to own land in the United States. Probably not. But because they showed up with a bunch of guns and they're supported by people who have a lot of money, they weren't like arrested or shot or anything like, or beat or tear gassed or water cannoned like the Standing Rock, yeah, in the city of Lakota out west. And they occupied a national wildlife refuge. And basically their idea is that the federal government should own no land. And this idea actually got going back under Reagan. If you remember, those of you who have long memories, James Watt, Secretary of Interior, if he could have done it, he would have sold all public lands under BLM. He couldn't do it, but times are changing, so we'll see. Another one is private entities run concessions. Talked about that. The problem there was like when the National Park Service ran all the concessions in Yellowstone, they got to keep all the money. Okay, so if you go to Yellowstone and you stay at a campground or you stay at a resort or you go in the hotels they got there or you go shopping in the shops they got there, a bunch of that money leaves the park and never comes back. And so here's the Park Service who doesn't have enough money to operate, but they're a profit center for someone who's taking money out of the park from all those millions of visitors. It'd be much better if all that money stayed in the park. And then finally, you can talk about our campaign finance system and Citizens United and people buying politicians and expecting profits, as our education secretary has been quoted as saying. We invest in these politicians and we expect a return on our investment.
Is that the new one?
Yeah.
DeVos?
Is it DeVos or DeVos? DeVos, is that how you say it? DeVos? I don't know how to pronounce it actually.
What a jerk.
But anyway, it's also happening here in Wisconsin. And let me see here. Okay, so the future is going to be public or private. And this debate is going to happen immediately. Actually, the Republican Party's their party platform that they grew up at their convention basically calls for the sale of all public lands by the federal government in the United States. And so they now control the government. So how responsive to public opinion and stuff will they be? In part depends on how much noise the public makes. And there's going to be a lot of issues that are going to be in front of people. So will this one be at the forefront, or will it be one of those low-key ones that people don't get behind and don't scream and yell about, and so things happen? So questions and comments?
Yeah, can you enlarge on that, the conflict between public, private, and the potential for either direction?
Well, like I said, well, it's going to be really interesting. So obviously our new president is appointing a cabinet. And some of the people that he's appointed to different positions are straight out of, let's sell every last drop of public land we got. But then he appointed an interior secretary who has no problem giving leases to oil and gas companies on public land, but is adamant that we should not sell the public land. So he set up a huge fight within his cabinet over what's going to happen to public lands. And then, of course, you have Congress, it's going to be interesting, because I know as part of the Wildlife Federation during the election cycle, we were putting pressure on Ron Johnson and Sean Duffy to commit to not selling any public lands. And I actually got to go over to, Ron was touring supper clubs as part of this pre-campaign efforts. And so he came over to a supper club in River Falls, and so I told my wife we were going on a romantic date. So we went over to River Falls, and I put on my Born to Hunt, Forced to Work hat and my NRA t-shirt, camouflaged myself a little bit, and then went over there and gave him a lot of grief about public lands until he finally got frustrated with me and told me he was an environmentalist and he agreed with me. But we organized, everywhere he went, we tried to have a Wildlife Federation member there talking about the same issue and asking him questions. And so we got a lukewarm commitment out of him to protect public lands. So those are the types of things that people are gonna need to do. You know, if you can get to them in person, that obviously has the most impact. Whether they'll let themselves go out in person, we saw in Colorado where the guy had over 150 people or something like that show up at his town hall meeting when he expected 5 or 6 to tell him he liked the AC or Obamacare. And so he literally talked to like 8 people and ran out the back door. So we'll see if they continue to make themselves available to public or not. But we just have to find ways to get the message through that public lands, you know, we refer in the Wildlife Federation to public lands as an American birthright. You know, I mean, this belongs to all citizens, this belongs to everybody, and, you know, something about, I mentioned the Bundy clan, the whole thing started because Cliven Bundy is freeloading off of public lands. He's grazing his land, his cows on public lands and refusing to pay us, the taxpayers, the money he owes us. Then you got all of these people that, the federal government, and showed up with guns and whatever. He's in jail now, so we'll see where it ends up. They did have one trial and they got, the jury let him go free. Yeah, they said, no, yeah, it was, I couldn't even follow the whole thing, but anyway, they got off. But now there's other trials and other charges, and so we'll see what happens. Here in Wisconsin, let's see, this must be advanced. I can figure out which one of these it is. What's that bottom one? All right, let's see if this works. Oh, shoot. Oh well. Anyway, technology sometimes. So there, our dear governor, of course, has his list of special campaign contributors, and family by the name of Uline, they own some kind of business and have given him like a lot of money.
Uline Incorporated.
Yeah, Uline, yeah. And so there was, they own some land up by Minocqua, a really nice condo apartment sort of thing. Pretty high-end real estate, but the problem was it didn't quite go to the lakeshore because the DNR owned some land on the lakeshore between their fancy property and the lakeshore. So one day, all of a sudden, it showed up that they were going to buy this land from the DNR, and everybody's like, "Wait a minute, this isn't right," and so the DNR, if you're familiar with how the conservation works in Wisconsin, we have something called the Natural Resources Board, which is a group of citizens appointed by the governor that kind of sort of has final say over what the DNR does. At one point in time, they had the power to appoint the DNR secretary, but Tommy Thompson got rid of that, and we almost got it back under Jim Doyle, but that's another story. But I would slap Jim Doyle if I met him. But anyway, so the Natural Resources Board said, well, this is looking a little sketchy and people are screaming about it, so we're going to table it. So last winter sometime, the Ulines then decided that they were going to swap some land out in the middle of nowhere along the lakeshore that was mostly swamp, and the proposed person was getting, so we're actually subsidizing these industries by, as a taxpayer, getting ripped off by giving away the leases. So they may make the leasing just much easier. The other option, of course, is to just simply give the land away to Exxon or whoever, and that's where our Secretary of State came from, right, Exxon? Yes, so they may just give it to, kind of like when we fought the war in Iraq, it was basically Halliburton's profit center.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they kind of, there's two ways they can go. One, they can just give the land away with cheap leases, or they can just give the land away altogether.
Why would they give it away? I
Um,
mean, why would they
Citizens,
make it rational?
Citizens United. Well, one is a profit thing, and the people that have paid for the election, of course, now expect a return on their investment. And the other is an ideological thing, going back to, I said, the people that believe that the federal government, well, one, we shouldn't have government in some of their minds, but also because it's just wrong for the federal government to have land. It should all be private.
So they're not gonna be equitable in giving to all of us, they're just gonna find a few people to give it.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yes.
So I think we should have one of these sessions focus on energy policy and how it relates to climate disruption, because if you start with climate disruption as the premise, then none of this stuff should come out of the ground.
True,
So,
but it's not happening.
but that's what I'm saying, if we, like you said, like we were
Yeah.
successful to keep water from giving this stuff away.
Right,
So if we organize,
Yeah.
we can stop, we can shut this down from the standpoint of just, where's the planet is at risk.
yeah, well, we should be able to. But here in Wisconsin, all references to climate change have been taken off the DNR website. And a bland statement about the climate might be changing, but we don't know why, is now there.
Plus all the scientists have been.
Yeah, I'll talk about how the DNR has been trashed here in Wisconsin in just a
White
second.
House website.
But back in the corner, yeah, you had a question back there.
I want to go back to the issue of the federal government shouldn't own property. If the federal government is us, because this is a republic, we are allowed to own property, so what's the deal?
I- you know-
Control, but we have to have some logical argument.
Yeah, well, it's, I'm not sure, well, they claim,
It's fabulous.
and a lot of their claims are based on the 10th
No.
Amendment to the United States, to the Bill of Rights, about how the states have control, not the federal government. And so what they're saying is that a lot of this land should be just given away to the states, but then the states would just turn around and give it away to somebody else or sell it.
Nevertheless, even if it's state government, that's still us,
Correct,
in a republic, a
correct.
democratic republic.
But I'm not sure it's necessarily rational.
I
Um,
understand that.
Part of it too is that one of the great freedoms that they cherish is owning property. And if you own the property, you have the right to do anything to that property you wish. And if the government comes in and tells you what to do with your property, they call that a taking, and they can't take your property. So if I'm living next to you and I want to put speakers out and blare loud rock music at 3 o'clock in the morning every night, tough crap, because it's my property. Now, if you want to retaliate by playing opera back to me at 7 o'clock in the morning when I'm hungover, that's your right. But they don't, community, it's all about the individual, it's not about the community.
Thank you.
That's a big part of it. And we've seen this too with the frac mining, where townships and counties that adopted zoning ordinances have done much better in dealing with the frac mining than the counties that were unzoned, or the townships that were unzoned. And so, because there again, it's my property, I'm not gonna allow zoning in because that infringes on my property rights. And the frac miners understood this really well, that they could take advantage of it. And they were literally sending people to scour the records and find out which townships had zoning and which ones did not. And then they would move in and buy land for a frac mine in an unzoned township. And the people that lived next to the mine wanted to do something, and they had no legal recourse because there was no zoning.
I want to say two things. I agree with you that we are the people, and we should have a right to those lands. But there's the problem, as I see it, is from what I've read, is that they don't want to pay taxes. They're the ideologues, basically in the Republican Party, like starting from the Koch brothers. They are large industrialists, and they pay taxes, but they don't want to pay it. They don't want to pay Social Security, Medicare, or any of those things. And public lands are a way that the government spends money. And any way they can cut the government to nothing and not have to spend any money is their goal. Okay. The second thing is, the gentleman that asked about energy policy, and I say on Monday evening at 6:30 at the UCC Church, the Congregational Church, on Wilson Avenue behind the Burger King, in their community hall at 6:30, we'll be showing Before the Flood, the DiCaprio and other producers movie, and they have much of that deals with fossil fuels and energy and how we use it, and climate change and how it's affecting climate change. So if you want to see, it's free. You want to see that movie Before the Flood? He's traveled to 5 different continents and looked at how we, from fossil fuels blowing off mountaintops and so on, and how we use and how we deforest and so desecrate and overuse our natural resources and so on, and what it's causing from the Arctic all the way down to the Antarctic, what it's doing to our environment. So 6:30 Monday at the Congregational Church. If you want, it's free.
Okay.
Thank you.
So in Wisconsin, since really the late 1800s, we've had a real effort to protect and improve the environment, up until the election of Scott Walker, and when Republicans seized total control of the government. But it didn't start there. It actually started with Tommy Thompson, as I mentioned before. We had the Natural Resources Board, which appointed the DNR secretary. And that removed the immediate interplay, and it wasn't done and that's actually, the idea came from Aldo Leopold, that the immediate pressures of daily politics, the DNR secretary should be insulated from that, and the DNR should, to a certain degree, so they can make decisions based on sound science, and not what was politically expedient. So when Tommy Thompson got rid of that, we spent years trying to get it back. We almost got it back, except Jim Doyle, after promising to sign the bill, vetoed it, and then Scott Walker got elected. One of the things that people don't know is that with Act 10, of course, we've heard all about the unions and all of that stuff. There was also a provision in Act 10 that allowed Scott Walker and Kathy Stebb to have a cup of coffee one day and sign a memorandum between them, which removed the DNR as a state agency. I forget the term they used, but a charter agency or something. But anyway, the DNR quit being a state agency and basically became the ward of Scott Walker. And one of the things it did was it kind of removed all the civil service protections from DNR employees. And later on, they got rid of them all for all of the state employees, but that came much later. So that was the first thing. And then almost immediately, in the Wildlife Federation, we documented this quite extensively, is that enforcement of environmental laws just went. Within 2 years of Walker taking over, there was a 50% drop in the number of citations that DNR wardens wrote for everything, hunting, fishing, and environmental pollution. And then, so that happened. And then we've had attacks now on the scientists. They fired a whole bunch of those. The DNR, most positions are not replaced, so they got a huge vacancy list. We've been asking for years now to have an increase in hunting and fishing license fees to put more money into the DNR, and they won't even think about that. And then finally, they came out with this big reorganization, and it wasn't actually too bad. The plan Step came out with. It had some strange things, but she's strange. So anyway, we could have lived with it. And then right after it came out, Adam Jarko, who is a representative from Balsam Lake, that's where he lives up in that district, who is just rabidly anti-environment, anti-conservation, doesn't think we need any laws to protect the environment. Property rights trump everything. And he's also a member of ALEC. ALEC. And I'll talk about ALEC in a minute. But he came up with this plan to basically terminate the DNR. He wants to divide it up into like 3 or 4 pieces and throw some of it. He wants to give the Jason.
Ken.
This gentleman back here, everyone, if you don't know him, his name is Jason O'Day, an old friend of mine. He's also
right.
a stellar musician.
All right.
And are you going to be performing anywhere in the area before you leave, so we can come listen
Not
to
this time around. This time I'm
Okay.
just visiting. But
Okay.
I play in a group called Intuitive Compass, and we play vaudevillian folk music.
Yeah, he's
Find
really
us
good.
online.
So if you ever hear of his group, go watch
Yeah.
him.
I got a split right now. I gotta go take care of my brother.
Yeah.
But it's been a pleasure to listen to
Yeah.
you
Well, thanks
today.
for coming. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Take care.
So back to the deal. His idea, one, he wants to take the stewardship funds and put it in the Department of Administration, which Ms. Walker just got a pocket. He wants to move the 3 or 4 scientists that are still left in the DNR. He's going to put that someplace. He's going to put forestry someplace. He's going to put law enforcement someplace. He's basically we're going to no longer have the DNR. As Lorene mentioned, I am one of 16 citizens in the state that has filed a petition with the EPA. Basically, we've sued the state of Wisconsin for non-enforcement of the Clean Water Act. And it was actually looking really, really good until the election. Because everything that we claimed, whenever the EPA investigated one of our claims, they said, yeah, you're right. This state is not enforcing the Clean Water Act. Water pollution is getting much worse in this state. And we had asked for the EPA to actually take over enforcement of the Clean Water Act in the state instead of the DNR. They've never done that, but they usually force the state to actually start doing their job. And so we were on track to get that done until Walker trumped it all, pretty much the same. But anyway, got elected, and now we have an anti-EPA environmental person who's going to be in charge of the EPA if that happens. So, in fact, he spent his career as Oklahoma Attorney General suing the EPA over things. So, yeah, that's out there. One good thing, and I couldn't get those links to work, but as I mentioned before about hunters, and these guys that hunt out west who are going to lose their elk hunting and their antelope hunting grounds because of these changes, they are mad already. And all of the major outdoor magazines, both hunting and fishing publications, and also things like Outdoor, where it's the non-consumptive the hikers and backpackers and mountain climbers, they are all up in arms about the sale of public lands. The backpackers and stuff, they're Dave Granola and they don't vote Republican, so they could care less. But the guys that carry guns, they tend to vote Republican. And, they often are NRA members. And if all of a sudden they're really infuriating their base, especially out west, that could get really interesting. And so the guys that hunt aren't necessarily hanging out at the bar having beer with the Bundy types, because they understand the value of public land because they use it. And they may be the guide. They may make their living as a big game guide. Or they, and I had a friend that did this for years, but in the fall he hunted, he guided hunters, and in the summer he guided whitewater rafts down the river. And it was all public land. That's his livelihood. So they're not going to take this without a fight. There's going to be a big fight. So when we talk about making noise, it's going to kind of not break down on the traditional lines of a lot of things with the Republicans and the Democrats and the blue and the red. And there's going to be a lot of red that are saying, no way, you're going to sell my livelihood. So it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. Any other comments or questions?
Thank you.
Okay.